For those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Kerry. I'm a professor here at the University of North Florida. I've been here for about 11 years, and I've been studying the topic of this film for about 15 years. So before we watch the film, there are a few things I'd like to say, and if you will, please just bear with me. First thing I want to do is I want to thank all of our sponsors. First is the Northeast Florida Lyme Association, this wonderful group of people here in Jacksonville who found me a little over a year ago and sort of adopted me, and we began working together trying to educate this community around here about this particular disease. And this is just one part of that. Certainly not the culmination, it's just part of the process. But we want to thank them. I was so pleased when I went to academic affairs here at UNF and mentioned my idea of being able to show this film at this venue, and it was totally embraced, and they have done the most outstanding job. As you see around you, there's a lot of folks here. So they promoted this wonderfully. I have a special thanks for Marianne Jaffe, and also I want to thank our events planner here on campus, Jen Urbano. Jen, amazing work. Thank you so much. Jen is who really made this happen. So I want to thank other folks. I want to thank Dean Challey of the Brooks College of Health. I want to thank David Jaffe and others with the UNF American Democracy Project. David Klein and others at the UNF Blue Cross and Blue Shield Center for Ethics, Public Policy, and the Professions. And there are many others of you who have helped promote this event across the southern United States, and so I really appreciate that. We have a lot of folks here from different places, and we'll see that more here in just a second. Now, I'm going to say this just very briefly. The opinions of this movie are not necessarily those of everyone who's promoting the project. I just want to say that right here, and then move on. Now, we have panel members here for a question-answer session we're going to have after this. We hope that you will stay if you can. We'll have a structure for that. We can mention that in a little more detail afterwards when we get ready to start that. But after the film, we will have a question-answer session with microphones out there for people to stand in line and come up and ask questions of our panel. And we've got some folks representing different areas who are going to be on that panel. First, we have Mandy Hughes from the film. You'll get to see her and throughout the film, and you'll also get to see her in person up here for the question and answer. And Dane Boggs from the Northeast Florida Lyme Association. We've got Liz Schmitz from the Georgia Lyme Association. Virginia Inez from Southeast Florida chapter of the Lyme Disease Association, and we have Lisa Higgins from the Lyme Disease Support of Southeastern Tennessee. So we have folks who've come from quite a distance to be here. You may have noticed there's some informational brochures and other things out on a table outside. If you didn't go through there or pick up any of those things on your way in, please look at those things on your way out whenever you may have to leave, and pick up whatever you'd like and take it with you as you go. I also want to say that the question-answer session of following the film is going to be videotaped, so I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that before we begin. Now, the purpose of this event, as you probably already know, is to try to increase awareness about Lyme disease, the risk of Lyme disease, its severity, and those types of things in this particular area. And so we're aiming our efforts at the entire community, medical, scientific, and the general public. Now, I want to give you a little background before anybody asks later. I'm going to go ahead and say it. How did I get involved in doing this sort of thing and studying Lyme disease? So I'll just give you a little brief bio. I grew up in Kentucky, or as some people like to say, Corn-tucky. I grew up spending a lot of time in the outdoors. I was fishing, I was hunting. I had a profound love of nature. And that carried with me throughout my life. When I began to go to college, I also developed a strong interest in human health and disease. And somehow these interests meshed and I began to study these diseases that people can get from having contact with nature and specific aspects of nature, like ticks. I got really interested in studying Lyme disease in the southern United States because it seemed like virgin territory. There was virtually nothing known about Lyme disease yet, and I wanted to go find new things. I wanted to make new discoveries, and this idea of becoming a disease detective, which is what epidemiology is about, really intrigued me. I did most of my work early on looking at the organism that causes Lyme disease in nature. So I was looking at wild animals to see if they were carrying it. I was studying ticks to see if they contained the bacteria. I even found the bacteria in lizards and some other reptiles that no one had ever done that before. And as I studied this problem, my thoughts about Lyme disease really began to change. And what I learned was that the things that I had read about, the things that other experts had said, didn't hold up. And so I quit using that as the basis for my investigations, and I just started investigating with an open mind, a really exploratory approach. And that, I think, led to more of the new discoveries. And so I've been fortunate to be able to follow that approach. Now, I want to give you a little quote. I was trying to think of what I wanted to say tonight. And I happened to look up on my wall in my office, and I had this quote from years and years ago that I typed up and I printed out and put on my wall, and it's from a very old biology textbook from, I think, maybe the 1930s. And it's a fellow by the name of William T. Hornady. And you'll understand this when I said that about my love for nature as I was growing up. But this is the quote. "Those who by force of circumstances are compelled to grow up and live out their lives without knowing the satisfaction that is derived from an intimate acquaintance with at least one section of animal life lose much pleasure to which they legitimately are entitled." We don't talk like this much anymore, do we? "There is one result of zoological knowledge that no man can adequately set forth in words. It is the unending satisfaction and at times the delight that comes throughout the journey of life to every person who is able to recognize the most important animals that are met by the way. He who knows the wild animals of the world always travels among friends, and in every land he finds a welcome. To him the whole world is interesting. To his pleasure in life thousands of beasts, birds, and creeping things contribute. Nature's multitude of interesting forms stimulate his efforts to acquire knowledge, and her fields of research come the nearest to revealing the fountains of perpetual youth." That meant something different to me when I read it the other day than it used to mean to me. I really started focusing on studying Lyme disease in people about 2 years ago. And what I've learned since that time has been amazing, and it's been startling to me. Let me tell you something else that happened just recently. Not 2 weeks ago, I went outside on my back porch, and a wild gray fox was attacking my 2 cats. It did it 2 days in a row. And I shot and killed that wild gray fox because I thought it was rabid. And it was. It was tested by the Duval County Health Department. Yes, nature is amazing in all its variety and splendor. But as many of you know, there is also a dark and mysterious side. Hidden dangers lurk in our natural areas, our parks, and national forests, and sometimes literally in our own backyards. This film that you're about to watch is a documentary about a disease at the center of some of the greatest medical and scientific mysteries and controversies of our time. It sheds light on these controversies to varying degrees, and it shows the personal stories of several patients battling the illness and the doctors and scientists trying to help them. And you know, despite the fact that we discovered the organism that causes Lyme disease in the United States over 30 years ago, there are still multiple myths that prevail. So bear with me for just another minute because I want to mention a few of these myths and then ask you a couple of questions. Myth number one, there is no Lyme disease in Florida. Or insert any other southern state in there if you like. Or at least it isn't endemic. Myth number two, we don't even have ticks that can transmit Lyme disease in this region. That's a myth. Myth number three, current lab tests for Lyme disease are highly sensitive, or as some people say, very accurate. Myth number four, negative test results mean you don't have Lyme disease. Or, on the other hand, this is myth, positive results are just false positives. Very unlikely. A friend of mine who died last year on Father's Day, who I was collaborating with in research, the late Ed Masters from Missouri, had a phrase that he loved to say. He always used to say, absence of proof is not proof of absence. Absolutely, not being able to identify Lyme disease in a patient does not mean that it's not there. Oh, and here's another one. There's no such thing as chronic Lyme disease infection. And the last myth, Lyme disease is just a popular fad diagnosis, sometimes self-diagnosis. One of the people in the film here, you'll notice, uses this phrase, and I'm quoting, it's the disease du jour. I have a hard time believing that thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people out there in the world really want to be this sick. It's hard to believe. So let me ask you a few questions, and then we'll get on with the film. If you don't want to raise your hand, you don't have to, okay? But if you don't mind raising your hand, feel free. How many people in the audience tonight are Lyme disease patients or have a friend or family member who is a patient? How many people? Feel free to look around. Okay. Thank you. How many patients here know or strongly suspect that you acquired your infection in Florida, if you don't mind? Okay. Thank you. How many patients who now live in Florida acquired your infection somewhere else, if you don't mind? Okay. Looks like about half and half. Okay, how many people acquired infection in Georgia? Anybody from Georgia? Okay, there's a few. You might look around there. Anybody from South Carolina? If you acquired your infection in South Carolina? Anyone who acquired infection in Alabama? You feel pretty certain about Alabama? I was just wondering if we had some Alabama folks. What about Tennessee? There's a few, okay. Or North Carolina? Or maybe you just don't know, but you have Lyme disease, but you don't know where you got it. Okay. Missouri, oh, Ed Masters. Any others? Okay, thank you. Okay. How many of you people here tonight believe that Lyme disease occurs in Florida and other southern states, if you don't mind? Okay. A lot of believers here. Maybe we're all wrong. Now, maybe let me ask you one last question. How many patients here tonight were diagnosed early and were able to get treated within the first few weeks of onset of your Lyme or Lyme-like symptoms? Raise your hand. Look around. Okay. Clearly, we have a problem here. I think there's definitely a need for some of the things that we're trying to do here. We're just trying to increase awareness and education. It is so important that we do a better job of recognizing and treating this disease early. The pool of people who have Lyme disease is growing and growing every single year. And it's much more difficult to treat when we get in that chronic stage. So I thank you all for being here. I hope you enjoy the film. And I look forward to talking to you some more during the question and answer following. Thanks a lot. We're going to ask our panel members to come up, and we'll briefly introduce ourselves, those of us who haven't done that yet. And then we'll just start taking questions. And what we ask that you do is, step forward to the microphones on either side. And what we can do, if we need to, is we'll just go kind of back and forth in turn, because we've got one on each side over here. And we welcome you to come up and ask questions. And, you can make comments as well. But we do ask that you keep in mind there may be others who would like to ask questions as well. So we'll try to ask a few questions and then allow other people to speak. And feel free to direct your question to individual panel members, okay? So we'll invite you to start doing that right now. And then we'll let the panel members introduce themselves as well. This is yours.
Hi, I'm Virginia Annis. I represent the Lyme Disease Association chapter of Southeast Florida.
Hi, I'm Mandy Hughes. I think you know a little bit about me. You're more than welcome to ask me any extremely personal question that you have.
Hi, I'm Liz Schmitz from the Georgia Lyme Disease Association. Hello, my name is Lisa Higgins. I co-facilitate a Lyme disease support group in Southeast Tennessee.
I'm Dane Boggs, from the co-founder of the Northeast Florida Lyme Association.
And I think you know me now. So come forward, ask questions, please. We'd love to hear from you.
Is this, yes, it's on, okay. Dr. Clark, this is going to be for you. I'm Bill Heiter. I've been a game warden in the state of Florida for 26 years and lived in the state of Florida. So I've had hundreds of ticks, and most of them have been the Red Sea ticks and stuff. But I'm probably the latest latest diagnosed probably with Lyme. This happened either on the 16th or the 18th of last month when I got the tick. So I know I found it on the 18th or the 19th. Pulled it off on the next day, just a perfect little red dot where the tick had bit, and then like if you'd laid a dime right over the top of it and drew a red circle with an ink pen. So I'm assuming, and I took a picture, I should have brought it maybe, but went to the doctor on the Monday, the following 2 days later, and he diagnosed me with early stages. Maybe it's good for me. I did it while I was at work, so I'm workman's comp. But when they sent me to the workman's comp doctor, it's like the doctor from hell kind of clinic, type thing. So it might not be too good that workman's comp's going to be handling this with what I've been hearing about insurance. They put me on 2 weeks of the doxycycline. I'm noticing on your sheet you're saying 3 to 4, I believe, and in the green book it's talking 6 months for early diagnosis. I was only, according to the medical book the doctor had, he put me on 2 weeks. What do you think?
Okay, so I have to preface my response, as you know I'm going to, as a researcher and not an MD, but I can give you my opinion about these things. Can I ask you something as well? Were you having any symptoms? Did you have anything other than the little rash at the tick bite?
I had been aware of Lyme disease for years because of the work I do. So I even kidded with the wife on Friday night, I'm going to probably get Lyme out of this thing, Since then I had one night, I think I had cold sweats, something like maybe Sunday or Monday night. Right now it's like I can feel things crawling on me all the time. It's just
very sensitive. Yeah,
little twinges. I mean, I've been sitting here all night tonight scratching. It's usually red bugs that does that to me, but I'm just, but I know arthritis is setting in the hand. I had a little nerve nodule or something cut off the finger yesterday, but I know I got arthritis a little bit, but really nothing bad yet.
The rash that you described, Did it get any larger?
No, it was gone in about 3 days after I'd started
Okay.
taking antibiotics and everything. It was
Okay.
gone.
And you said it was dime size?
It was about the size of a dime, and you just lay that centered over the top of the bite, and it just like if you took a red ink pen and drew a
Okay.
circle around it. If you look at the, we saw probably 4 or 5 Target 18-wheel trucks coming up from D-Land today to Jacksonville, and you know they got the white Target emblem, and then there's a red one. It looked like the red one, a red bite and a red circle.
And I want to build on what you brought up because it allows me to speak about some important things. So I may seem like I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm getting to some things. One thing that this brings up is a very good question, and it's about rashes. You do not have to have a bullseye-looking rash to have Lyme disease. In fact, the majority of the rashes that are known to be associated with Lyme disease infections do not look like a bullseye. They will be more solid red. They will be oval-shaped. Some of them do expand and get quite large. Some of them don't get that large. You know, I've seen a very, very typical bullseye that was about this large, and it didn't get any bigger than that. Sometimes people have multiple lesions in different parts of their body away from where the tick bite occurred. So this is not all that definitive, and it's unfortunate that it's like that. But so you know, it's hard to know from that. I do think it's highly responsible to treat prophylactically if the patient is not known to have any sensitivity to that particular antibiotic or group of antibiotics. And I've changed my opinion about that. Years ago, I would always say, unless you have signs or symptoms following the tick bite, you don't need to be treated. That was before I began testing human patients across the country and tested over 200 patients, and now I have over 100 positive results on people who are mostly in the chronic stages of infection now. So I think with the minimal cost and risk to people with maybe a month or so of oral antibiotics, I think it's very responsible to treat prophylactically in many of the cases, and we may never know if that patient had Lyme disease, and I think that's preferable to finding out many months or years later that we missed an opportunity. So in terms of the length of time, I have known of specific patients who've been treated for a month who were in the early stage of infection where the rash was still present, and they had continuing symptoms, and they were treated for another month of oral doxycycline, and they had no more symptoms after that. And I'm pretty sure that they didn't have any more problems because I never heard from them again. That's usually a good sign. I'm very concerned about 2 weeks of antibiotics if one really does have Lyme disease. I'm concerned that that might not be long enough. This bacteria disseminates very quickly. It can disseminate much more quickly than we realize. And it's just, I'm just concerned about that. I mean, I would, if I were a doctor, I would treat most patients for at least 3 weeks to a month who were in the early stage, like your situation perhaps. And then if the patient continued to have symptoms, I would consider, you know, going beyond that. But as a minimum, I would think 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, that was a couple of my concerns. You know, I found it so quick, you know, 2 days time period or so, that it maybe just been some type of other infection or something, not really from that. But
now you've had a lot of tick bites in your experience.
yeah, but they've been mostly the seed ticks.
Did this look and react differently from most of the tick bites that you get?
I've never had that reaction to them before. So, and it was a black-legged deer tick. You know, I've got it in a little baggie at home. Well, I put it in one of them little 3-ounce cups and
Yeah.
showed it to the wife that evening. It wasn't in the cup when we got home. I found it later on. It had crawled out.
At least you
But,
found it.
I do have the tick and all that kind of stuff, you know, but
Yeah.
it is a black leg. And just as quick as the symptoms showed up, I was, you know, I just didn't know if it would show that quick. But, you know.
Kerry,
Would you like to go ahead?
I just wanted to jump in and say I think that you're really fortunate that you had a positive test. So, I mean, you're lucky because the people. I thought he was positive. He had a diagnosis,
Yeah, yeah.
not a blood test.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm having a blood test in a
As a
couple of weeks.
non-doctor and someone who can speak freely, I'd take as many, I'd take as heavy a dose as you could of the antibiotics for as long as you can, because you don't want to end up like a chronic long-term Lyme, like the people you saw in the movie. So I would, from my perspective, I'd lean toward a heavy dosage for a long period of time.
Yeah.
So that's, anybody else?
I'll add, too, that I think that if you read In Cure Unknown, I believe it was Dr. Ed Master started experimenting with the treatment protocols, and he noticed that the longer that he treated initial cases, the fewer patients came back later. So I think that he expanded his protocol to about 6 weeks initially. So that might be helpful.
Since we're all jumping in on this one, I was originally diagnosed with Lyme disease when I was 19 and given 2 weeks of antibiotics. It came back with a vengeance around 22, age 22.
Yeah, that's my problem I'm thinking about with my workman's comp, whether they're going to, But the first doctor I went to, he only put me on amoxicillin for 1 week. Then when I went to the workman's comp doctor 2 days later, he said, amoxicillin's not even there. And I said, well, he put me on the doxycycline for 2 weeks, so that's a little better, I guess. But probably.
But you just gave a good key away that, your treatment was even delayed because of the 1 week of amoxicillin. So that's something to keep in mind when you're watching your own symptoms, because mine came back with a vengeance, and I'm 33 now. That was a long road. So
Well,
I hope that,
Yeah, well, I'm
this
an 8.5
helps.
year lung cancer survivor and 7 years of almost constant kidney stones, and I'm not going to plan on letting some little tick put me down. So, and I want to thank Jen,
Thank
wherever
you.
she is, wherever Jen is that did the advertising for this. She sent it out to Fish and
Jen?
Wildlife Commission. Sent an email out to Fish and Wildlife Commission. I think you probably answered one of my emails. Say there's only 2 of us here from the commission.
Hey, I was happy when I
Okay.
found out that went
Right.
out to everybody.
It did.
That was very responsible. That they actually sent it, I think, to every person in the FWC in the state of Florida.
And there's only 2 of us here today. I mean, that's really disappointing.
I'm very happy that you're here today. Thank you. And I would add also that feel free to contact me by email or contact the Northeast Florida Lyme Association if you'd like to talk to anybody about some advice or other things like perhaps referrals and so forth. That's what they're here for.
We do have a list of doctors that we can provide you with.
Okay. Over here, please, ma'am.
In talking with doctors in the medical community here in North Florida, we've run into a lot of doctors that have said Lyme disease does not exist in the Southeast. But I just don't understand. I could go to Pennsylvania and come back with Lyme disease, and I just don't understand the foundation for them saying that it is impossible in a geographical region. And I'm wondering if there's been any medical research on the migration of the bacteria.
You want me to take that one?
Anybody that would like to.
Okay. I can start. We hear this all the time, and this is one of my questions that I just repeat over and over and over. Even if the bacteria was not endemic in Florida, with people moving the way they do, we would still have Lyme disease in Florida. So when a patient presents to a clinician, no matter where in the world they are, that patient could potentially have Lyme disease as the root cause of the problem. So I'm perplexed just like you are about that. That one I can't get around. I mean, I understand some concern about evidence for the organism here in Florida and that sort of thing. There are published studies in very good, appropriate journals for these types of studies that document the presence of the Lyme disease organism in the state of Florida in multiple sites throughout Florida. I'm familiar with some of those because my name's on some of those papers. And I don't know why that's not known better. I mean, I think we need to be more aware of the scientific literature that exists about some of these things. So we all have to do a better job of trying to improve this situation and educate doctors and others. And all I ask is that people have an open mind to hearing things that disagree with maybe what they read that may have been the latest evidence 10, 20 years ago, but it's not the latest evidence today. And we need to catch up on that stuff. There's a growing body of evidence that shows that Lyme disease exists all over the place. It is endemic in the southern United States, and it's in people who've been sick for years. And I have a good bit of evidence that I've been gathering. I haven't published it yet, and I would be happy to speak to any doctor individually, any group of doctors. I would welcome the opportunity to come and present my evidence, to talk to them about that, and all they need to do is ask me. We ask them too, so. Did you have any follow-up comment?
Oh, just it's just been very alarming that there's such a knee-jerk reaction to the suggestion. Some doctors will just even refuse flat out to investigate the possibility, even suggested as a co-infection. There's just a complete resistance.
It's a big concern. We know, and I definitely appreciate your comment.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm David Chenoy, and I'm a retired physician from Jacksonville, practiced here for 25 years, and actually my comments speak to both of the previous people because I was in absolute perfect health and traveling the world in a vigorous manner. Went for a walk in the Guana Woods by the Guana Preserve with my wife 2 weeks after coming back from foreign travel, and 4 days later found a tick between my toes, which probably had hopped up off the bathroom floor because we had dressed in an appropriate way and picked all the ticks off. And although I've practiced here for 25 years, I wasn't sure what I should do. Called the ER, talked with the ER doctor, and was advised simply to take it off. Period. And I was fine. A week later, less than a week later, I became acutely, violently ill. Ended up in the ER thinking I was dying. And make a long story short, I became bedridden for a year, and then chair-ridden for a second year, and gradually resumed physical health over the third year. I'm now 5 years out, and I'm basically back to normal physical activity. So if you need a physician to speak to the fact that you can get Lyme disease here, I'm certainly proof of that. The question that I have is, because so many people know that I've had it, a lot of people call and ask questions and so on, and I've read all of the conflicting information about what to do and not to do. The question that I have, and let me mention also that I never had the rash, never had a rash. I became ill acutely. Saw 4 different infectious disease physicians here before I went up to Johns Hopkins, where there's a physician who sees 20 cases every week or every month. All the blood tests, everything, were completely normal. IgM, IgG, all the ones that were shipped out to California. But as he said, and which I certainly know, is that the clinical course was that of an acute tick-borne illness with all the associated symptoms, with myalgias, aching of the muscles and the joints, nausea, tremor, difficulty reading, understanding, which then waxed and waned for about a year, basically in bed during that time. Couldn't get out of bed for more than 5 minutes at a time for the first year. The question that I have is, somebody's been walking in the woods, or their dog has come in, and they find a tick on them, and the question is, if it's 12 hours, if it's 24 hours, if it's 36 hours, if it's 48 hours, at what point should at least a brief course of antibiotics be used? I was just watching, while I was working out the other day, Fox had a prominent physician who's written a lot of books about, what to do with your health,
who recommended that if you find a tick, that you should wait until you either have a rash or start to have symptoms before considering treatment. And so my question is, what are the current recommendations, realizing there are a lot of different ones, as to how long the tick should be on and what the initial treatment should be?
I just want to share with you my opinion on that, and I am not a medical professional either, so I want to make
I'm
sure
sorry,
that...
I couldn't hear you too.
I said I will share with you my opinion on that, but I want to make known I also am not a medical professional. I am a mom, and I have watched my child suffer for almost 10 years with this disease. I have other children who are healthy. My opinion is, as soon as that tick is on there, it can transmit that bacteria. I cannot think of anything else in nature, and I would love for you to follow up on this, but I can't imagine going to an emergency room after a snake bite and a doctor saying, well, the snake wasn't attached for X amount of time, therefore you would not envenomate it.
Well, my question is, though, is that there's so much conflicting medical information,
right,
that at this point there's somewhat confusion, and recognizing there's probably no one standard, but from the experience that the panel has had, what do you tell people when they ask you?
I will tell you that every time I take a tick off of my younger children, I call the doctor and I tell him and I say, please, you've seen the suffering and the agony my older son has gone through. Won't you treat with doxycycline prophylactically?
Well, but as a doctor, though, you can't put that's my question, is you can't put everybody who's had a tick on them for X amount of time on a medication,
right,
that is not without side effects and not without problems.
I have a question.
So that's the question that I have.
I have a question. When you saw the tick, how long did you know it was attached already?
Well, I knew it had been there for 4 days. It was between my toes, and I found it the 4th day after our walk. And keep in mind, I mean, I've practiced here for 25 years. I didn't think that we had a Lyme type problem here. That's why I didn't worry about it.
You drew it back to the walk, correct?
Oh yeah.
Otherwise,
there's no other way that it could have been. It had to be at that time.
Right, but you never felt the bite.
No, I didn't know it was there. It was lodged between my little toe and the next toe in such a way that I didn't even see it until 4 days later. So it had been on for 4 days. Recognizing now that going on antibiotics right away would have been helpful. It was about another week. When I went to the ER very ill, we started doxycycline at that time.
My point is, no one ever feels the tick bite. How do you know how long it's been there?
Right.
So for someone to just blanketly say 24 to 72 hours is what it takes to transmit, how do you know?
Yeah, well, the only reason I knew, of course, because the only exposure I had been that walk in the woods on that day. Although, as I mentioned to somebody, if I hadn't seen that, my wife and I had just come back from 6 weeks in New Guinea, traveling down in ancient villages that live as they did 1,000 years ago with mud and dirt and all of that. So if I hadn't seen that tick, probably would have looked for some tropical, some vague tropical illness.
I know that.
Can I try to address this? And I appreciate your question, and I appreciate your comments so much, because it's great to have a physician, who will talk to us about this and who has some experience with the disease itself and that sort of thing. It is a dilemma. I mean, it is difficult. Physicians are in very difficult situations when they're dealing with these things. They have pressures from both sides. They want to help their patient. They want to treat the patient. Yet they do have a lot of pressure from other sides. The problem here is that there is not definitive evidence about how long a tick has to be attached to transmit. There have been some laboratory experiments with animals, and those experiments showed that there was much higher probability of transmission if the tick had been attached for 42 hours or longer. Now, here's the way I look at things in nature. Nature is highly diverse. We cannot fit nature into clean, neat little categories that humans like to do. We love to categorize things and have these neat little tables and so forth and algorithms that we can follow. And unfortunately, with this thing, it's hard to do that. I certainly believe, and most people would probably agree, the longer the tick is attached, the more likely that it would be able to transmit something. And that would be because probably it's transmitting higher numbers of the spirochetes. And we know with most things that the higher the dose, the more likely the infection, or maybe the shorter the incubation period and so forth. The problem here is it's often difficult to know how long the tick has been attached. Now, sometimes we can have good evidence because we know, hey, I was out in the woods this day and I haven't been out of the house since then. As long as you know the tick actually attached at the day you were in the woods and wasn't crawling around on the rug or came off the pet and maybe attached a day or two later or something like that. But the problem is I don't think most physicians have good experience with knowing the level of engorgement of a tick that indicates how long it's been attached. Now, I have some experience in that, and if somebody brought me a tick, I could tell you probably within a day or so of how long that tick was attached. But I don't think most physicians know that, and I don't think that it's realistic to expect that we're going to have a training program on that. So that's the problem that we're dealing with. I can't give you a definite answer, and you probably knew that anyway. But I appreciate, you're right.
Well,
I don't know.
I ask is people ask me for.
Oh, I understand. Yeah.
That's the bind that I'm in.
We know people are bitten by ticks every single day, year-round, in certain parts of the country. And there are probably millions of tick bites. I wish I could answer that definitively. I mean, I really can't. And I don't try to answer things that I can't answer. I'm very concerned, and I'm much more open to treating prophylactically than I used to be, just because I'm so worried about the potential negative impacts. And I do think sometimes the risk of not treating is much greater than the risk of treating if we're talking about an oral antibiotic that we have good certainty the patient's not allergic to or something like that. Yeah. Thank you so much for your comments and your questions.
Thank you, David.
Can I add one? Early studies did show transmission in 6 hours in some cases with humans, so I did want to add that. That was back in the early 90s where they did document cases of Lyme being transmitted in under 6 hours. And also prophylactic treatment, I wanted to mention that really quickly for while we're on that subject, that the IDSA currently recommends in endemic areas that a patient take one single doxycycline as prophylactic treatment. That has been proven even back in the early 80s to fail. Dr. David Volkman did a study where he tried to treat mice using one single doxycycline, and 80% of them remained infected yet converted to seronegative, so that they did not test positive any longer. So it's really important that if you are going to ask for doxycycline and the doctor says, well, gosh, the IDSA guidelines do say to give you one single tablet or one single capsule, then please point out the studies that show that that's not effective.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is something that I've heard recently, that if you catch it early enough, you can give one single dose and it will prevent that problem. I consider myself extremely fortunate because I went to the ER. We ruled out that I was dying from a number of other things, knew the tick, and so started on doxycycline, which would be within about 9 or 10 days. And the next day when I saw an infectious disease person, we did increase it to 200 milligrams twice a day, which is what I was told to do up at Johns Hopkins. And I think the fact that although I was extremely ill for 2 years, here I am. It's really at 4 years later, I'm fine and I have zero symptoms. So I consider that quite fortunate that I found it early.
Quick question. Was your physician at Hopkins Alcott?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Why do you ask?
I know.
Good or bad?
Oh, I was just asking.
Okay, yeah, and as a matter of fact, I consider him to have been very helpful because of two things. Number one, we went ahead on doxycycline for 3 months. At that point, I wasn't getting better, and we went to what they considered at that time sort of an experimental protocol of Biaxin plus Plaquenil. And as a physician, I know the reason they did that, because Biaxin is bacteriostatic, not bactericidal, but the Plaquenil apparently allows the antibiotic to get into the cells. After 9 months of that, the first year, I was still symptomatic, but with some improvement. And we tossed around the idea, should I go on IV antibiotics at that point, what? And his advice to me was to just go home, rest, as long as the symptoms are getting gradually better and not worse, and not to add another treatment that might make me feel worse. And again, over the next year, I did gradually get better.
May I ask you one question? Were you tested for Lyme disease?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Were you tested for Lyme co-infections?
I was tested for everything.
For other tick-borne diseases?
All of the others, and everything was absolutely normal. Dr. Alcott told me that in their labs up there, they have had patients where they actually, culture the bacteria out of the body, and yet the blood tests in that patient remain totally normal. So, again, my standpoint, can't rely on the rash, can't rely on the blood tests. They remain totally normal through the whole period of time, and still are now.
Thank you, David. Next question.
My name's Ron, and I went to Tennessee and contracted the Lyme disease virus. I was maybe out for 8 hours one day. And when I came in from stripping the property and cleaning up all the stuff, I came in and I had a tick stuck on me, and it left a red spot on me about that big. And 3 days later, I was in the hospital about to die. I mean, it just had my girlfriend, she had to basically carry me into the emergency room for treatment. So now I've been bouncing back and forth through doctors, and I saw this where it said that these make biofilm. Is that what keeps the medicine from working, and why the doctors, don't recognize this because of the way it has, builds something up around it for its protective shell or what? And how can I educate my doctor about that?
I think what they've proven, or they're trying to prove, I believe, is that what you saw in the film, Dr. McDonald discovered that spirochetes tend to gravitate and create a biofilm around them. Yeah, and cyst, yes, that's good. Encapsulate or with cyst-like material. And so what they believe is that the antibiotics can't penetrate that and kill the spirochetes. And they've also, I think it was Dr. Claude Guérin from the National Institutes of Health years ago, you can actually see a picture online where he documented a spirochete going into a B cell, hiding from the antibiotics. So I think there's a lot of different mechanisms that they use to evade the immune system and treatment, and that we just don't know at this point the actual, all of the mechanisms that they use. But it has been documented. They've documented live spirochetes in patients who have been treated for 2 full years. So the persistence, the evidence for persistence of this disease despite treatment is just abundant. I mean, there are plenty of peer-reviewed scientific research studies that are available worldwide. So present that to a doctor. That's what I would do. I usually take stacks like this.
I guess I'm next. Hi, I'm Kathy. My husband is Nick, and he has multiple sclerosis, which we think is really Lyme disease. Mandy, thank you so much for being here tonight. I've got thousands of questions, but I'm going to focus right on you right now. How are you feeling? What are you doing at this point? And how's your husband?
Well, I'll answer them in the reverse order. My husband's healthy. He plays flag football and golf once a week. The vision issues that he had are, I mean, can they be Lyme? Yes, but he also has his family, his father, his mother, and his sister all had really bad eyesight, and they also have really bad joint issues. So he is wearing glasses, and he doesn't have any headaches, and ever since I've known him, whenever he gets in front of the TV at night, he falls asleep. So that's pretty much on par. For me, I'm working full-time, going to nursing school, and I work out like 4 to 5 days a week, swimming, running, biking, weightlifting. I've been off of medication for a year, and thanks. And I'm, experimenting with food and how to manipulate that to enhance any further, goals I can reach, hopefully.
Splendid, thank you.
That was it.
That's all for now. I will pop back up. I will let other people have
Okay.
the microphone, but you'll
Okay.
Hi, my name is Daisy Sturzbach. I'm serving in Jacksonville as an AmeriCorps member this year. Oh, sorry. I'm serving in Jacksonville as an AmeriCorps member this year. I have a bachelor's in biology, but other than that, I have very little background knowledge of Lyme disease. So my questions are kind of from a biological basis. The film seemed to approach Lyme disease more from the point of view of the experiences of the patients. And I was wondering, one, if you could give kind of a brief synopsis of the research that has connected chronic Lyme disease with the chronic illness with the spirochete. And the other thing was, I believe you're developing a specific test for Lyme disease, correct? Oh, the film seemed to imply that co-infection with other agents, other bacteria, possibly other microbial forms, could contribute to particular manifestations of the disease. So I was wondering how you could develop a specific test for the disease if it can co-occur with so many other bacteria and microbial forms.
What was the first question?
Sorry.
Okay, maybe I'll go in reverse order there.
He's a biology student.
I love biology
Right up
students.
your alley.
They're always, okay. My test that I've developed, I'm kind of going in reverse order, so you may have to redo your other questions. The test that I do is DNA-based. It's a PCR test. It is designed to amplify a small fragment of the DNA of the specific organism that we're looking for, and this is based upon looking for Lyme borrelia. It is generic in the sense that it may amplify all known Lyme borrelia species, of which there are at least 16 species worldwide that have been described. It's a complex of species, and I know it can amplify many different species. It's designed to amplify all the known species in the United States that have been described so far. The presence of other microorganisms within the sample would not affect this particular test in a negative way because it's also very specific. It's very specific and it's very sensitive. What affects the sensitivity of my test more than anything is the fact that the concentration of the target organism, here we're talking about the Lyme spirochete, in the samples that I'm testing is typically extremely low. Part of that is because many of the patients that I test are already chronically sick. They've been sick for a long time. The organism is already disseminated throughout their body. And so I'm usually using blood samples. And Lyme borrelia are not found in high concentrations in the blood. Some other borrelia that cause disease are, but Lyme borrelia typically are not. So it's akin to looking for a needle in a haystack is what we're talking about here. There are other problems with testing blood samples from patients. There's a lot of issues with dealing with blood and so on, and we could talk about that in more detail later. But that's how my test works. And I can tell you from vast experience and lots of comparison testing, it is highly sensitive. I mean, I believe that my test is probably able to detect as few as a couple of spirochetes within a portion of DNA that I might test at any given time. But there are problems of inhibitory components of blood, heme, and other things. So it's not a perfect situation, okay? So theoretically, PCR is the greatest thing that was ever created, but in practice, it is nowhere near as good as it's made to sound. There are available PCR tests at clinical labs right now, and I am quite familiar with some of them, and I do not believe they are very sensitive, and I believe that most people who have Lyme disease will not test positive using those DNA tests. And I can't say that mine is great. It's a work in progress, but I am able to detect Lyme Borrelia in approximately 40+% of the patients that I test if I do multiple DNA extractions from that same patient's blood and do multiple PCR tests. What I'm working on is getting it to the point where I can do 1 or 2 rounds of that testing and have confidence that if it's there, I will find it and get a positive result, and if it's not, I won't. I'm not at that point right now, but that's what I'm trying to do. So that's kind of my testing right there. One of the problems with Lyme Borrelia is that it's highly diverse genetically. It's very difficult to isolate in pure culture. So to meet the criteria to come up with the most definitive evidence of causation of an infectious disease, Koch's postulates, is almost impossible with Lyme Borrelia. They grow extremely slowly. They're very sensitive, and that's where a lot of these other organisms in a sample might be problematic, because these things will tend to grow more easily than the Lyme Borrelia and outcompete them in a culture sample. I am planning to do culture attempts again this summer with patient samples that I will get. I have some new ideas of some ways I can try to tweak that. And I'm hoping that even if I can only get 1% positives after testing 100 patients, maybe I'll get one isolate. And it'll be the first time it's been isolated in culture from a human patient in the southern United States. That's a major goal of mine. I'm realistic about that, but we have to provide the definitive evidence. So, did you remember the other question?
I just asked if you could kind of give a brief overview of the evidence connecting the multi-symptom.
Yeah. One thing that we aren't really respectful of in the medical and scientific communities is negative data. Through the process of elimination, we can actually make progress in ruling out some diseases that we have fairly good tests for. Lyme disease is one we have horrible tests for, but some diseases we have pretty good tests for. And so through the process of exclusion, that's one way we arrive that we have no other meaningful explanation for the signs and symptoms of these patients, and we have some evidence of Lyme disease. And many patients will be tested by a Western blot test that looks for multiple antibodies to the Lyme organism. And these patients will show presence of some antibodies against the organism. But there is a very high bar that must be reached to be considered confirmed positive for surveillance purposes. And so a patient may show a couple of antibodies to the Lyme organism. They're considered negative still. And they may have no evidence of anything else, but their signs and symptoms are consistent with Lyme disease, and they do show some evidence of Lyme disease. And other than that, and there's a good bit of that, and the evidence where we've been able to culture isolate Lyme Borrelia from, say, rodents that have been tested in the laboratory who've been treated aggressively with antibiotics, and they can still culture it from some of them. I have a growing body of DNA evidence that I am very, very confident in, and I will be publishing this in the future. But I realize that there's not a tremendous amount to go on for the average person trying to do a quick internet search to find where this evidence is. It's I understand. There's not an awful lot out there, but it's not unusual in the history of medicine that we rely a lot on clinical presentation. We have diagnosed many different diseases over the years based only on that. And we continue to change our ideas, and paradigms continue to shift. We used to think cholera was transmitted by air, bad air, and miasmas. We didn't know it was waterborne. We used to think that stomach ulcers were caused by stress. Now we know it's caused by Helicobacter pylori, at least a lot of them are. We used to think Lyme Borrelia didn't live in lizards. Some of us now know that they can survive in lizards, and that's not just here, but also in other parts of the world. And I think in the future, there's no question in my mind, at least, that we're going to accept that there is chronic Lyme disease and that sort of thing. I wish it didn't exist, but it does. Thank you so much for your questions.
Thank
and if
you.
you want to talk to me any more about some of that stuff, you can email me anytime.
Okay.
And I'll give you a card if you need one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for the speech.
Hi. I got Lyme disease in 1988 in Egmont Key, which is an island in Tampa Bay. So I'm living proof that Lyme disease has been in Florida for at least 20 years. And I went to the University of Florida in student health where I was a grad student. I'm a wildlife biologist. And they didn't recognize what it was. It took a pharmacist on 13th Street in Gainesville who had a pamphlet on Lyme disease to show me what it was. And they sent me with the pamphlet over to student health to diagnose what it was. And they were real excited at student health because they told me I was going to be the first recorded case in Florida. And they took pictures of it and told me they were sending it off to CDC, which is very strange because CDC doesn't say there are any recorded cases in the 80s in Florida. So I guess the picture got lost in the mail. Pardon? Yeah, I had the rash. They took the picture. It was on my rear end, so I keep expecting the pictures to show up on the internet just any day. Anyway, my question is, I'm worried about my doctor. I have a doctor here in town who's very open-minded, and I believe I gave her Dr. Birascano's protocol, and I'd like her to use it on me, keeping on antibiotics. As long as I'm on antibiotics, I feel a lot better. But she's trying to use the old protocol, and I'm really afraid that she's going to get in trouble and lose her license. So can she keep me on antibiotics without getting at risk of losing her license? How can she go about doing that without getting in trouble?
I can take that one. Well, she'll just have to figure some way to stay out of trouble. But your question brings up the point. I think long-term antibiotic use, you're sort of on and off the drugs. Those of you out there who have Lyme, if you're on the drug, you feel better, your symptoms go away, it seems to go into the cyst form. And then you come off the antibiotics and you kind of have a relapse. So you're on and off, on and off. And I encourage you maybe to explore other alternatives. Frequency technology is something that I used, so I can speak from my own personal. It might not help everybody, but it did help me to overcome my Lyme. So I encourage you to explore all options.
Yeah, Dr.
Go ahead.
Hartman does microcurrent, and she suggested that.
Yes.
Something I learned from a registered nurse in the Orlando area, Maryland, have you heard of her?
No, not yet.
She suggested, and this works for me, to go to a rheumatologist, especially if you're having joint problems, and then you have Lyme and it's undiagnosed, you can go to a rheumatologist and get on long-term doxycycline therapy for the
Right. So thank you. So that would maybe be a way to get around it.
And one other comment is I'm glad that you're happy with your physician, but if you want to get somewhere, you need to see somebody who's not afraid.
I don't think it's necessarily afraid. Actually, she's got me on a lot of things that they recommended for Lyme, like low-dose naltrexone and things like that. She's done a lot of things right. Now that I'm reading about Lyme, she's done a lot of the things really right.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to mention, too, about your comment about Lyme not being found here in Florida in the 80s. Actually, there's a University of Florida circular from their agricultural department. I think it was some professors there. They identified 4 counties with native cases in Florida back in 1989. And they also found 27 counties at the same time in Georgia that had native Lyme cases, and those are CDC reported.
I'd like to direct my question to Mandy. The question is simply, do you want to have children?
No.
No. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes,
Thank
of course. My body is a sick body, no matter how healthy I appear right now. Yeah. And although you do have 2 contributing partners to make the baby, the foundation of that child is built from me. And I'm a sickly body, and I'm worried. I've been strong through everything. I don't think I could take that. For me, personally. I don't think I would be able to handle my child being sick because of me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Jillian Fisher. Actually came here as I'm a UNF business student and saw this program going on, and my stepmom actually has been diagnosed with chronic Lyme disease, and I spoke to her and asked her if she had any questions I could ask you guys. One she came up with was, I guess, what nutritional changes occur via the manganese pathway once the titers cross into that blood-brain barrier. Is there anything that can be taken to counter it? She's, in the past, has been given doxycycline. She was on that for 5 months. And then her kidneys started having adverse issues. So she's recently been off of it for a few months now. And so she's kind of looking for alternatives, whether it's holistic. Or Mr. Boggs, I read about where you had done the electrical, was it a frequency test?
That's right. It's a small machine about the size of a briefcase, and it puts out electrical frequencies which kill the spirochetes. And the reason I can speak to it is because I had herxes. I used the machine and had herxes just like Mandy did. Mine were different in nature, more intestinal issues. I was on antibiotics and they didn't work. So I had to do something else. And so I'd heard about the machine from my acupuncture doctor, and I tried it, and I had a herx. And that herx felt exactly the same as the one I had with the antibiotics. So to me, it was working. And I continued to use it, and I continued to get better and better, and now I'm well.
About how long were you
I used it for about a year.
Okay.
Once a week, you use it for 25 minutes, and that little session kills enough bugs to make you sick for 3 or 4 days. So that's an alternative that worked for me. It might not work for everyone. I also believe in doing yoga, meditation, going for a walk, eating right, no alcohol, taking care of yourself, Reiki, any kind of energy work, acupuncture. But I am a strong believer in that.
My stepmom Linda, she's actually really been big to like holistic medicines, working mostly with animals and equine, and has found ways to even like curb cancers, that type of thing, with alkaline diets, and she's really big into like trying to find the nutritional aspect of it.
I think that's great.
Has she tried raw food?
With animals. I'm not sure if she's done that for herself.
That's worked
ask her, though.
well for me. And a book that helped me was called Green for Life.
Okay.
And it's about a Russian family that came here to the States and adopted the typical American diet and got really sick. So they went raw food. Now, that's not for everyone, but the shakes that are in the book, the recipes are just ones that you would do in your blender. Like, for example, a handful of spinach, a cup of mango, and 2 cups of water, and you blend and drink. Cool. And that helped me, at least. And the breathing for yoga. If you're not able to do yoga because you're too sick, the diaphragmatic breathing is a different way than most people breathe. It's belly breathing, and it helps to oxygenate your body. And they can't really live in a high oxygenated environment. They like nitrogen.
So I guess to conclude, like the doxycycline, is there any other, I guess, prophylactic method that, or is that kind of it?
I'm on the other side of that equation. So does anyone want to speak to the medical?
Yeah, there's various different protocols that different physicians are using. The problem is that there's nothing set. There are different antibiotics that work better, but without knowing what her symptoms are, or, you're not talking to a doctor.
'Cause I was thinking maybe she just had a sensitivity to that one,
If she's getting worse, then that could mean that the antibiotic's working. The difference that most people don't understand with Lyme is that when you begin treatment, you get worse. You don't get better. It's not like, having any other illness, and you can get really bad. And then all of a sudden, it's almost like the clouds part and you get better. But that does take time.
The other possibility is that the drug's not working, and it's the actual infection that's making her worse, and, she's deteriorating. My perspective on Lyme disease is that it's an infection. It's a spirochete infection, and the way you get rid of it is either your own immune system kills it, or you use antibiotics to kill it, or a combination of those things. I think most doctors that have some success treating patients are ones who take a holistic approach. Anything to help boost your own immune system so that it eventually can take over is good. I firmly believe some people need more serious treatment or, something stronger than just oral doxycycline. I think that may help keep it at bay. It may put it into the cyst stage and help keep your symptoms down. But to try to truly eradicate this thing, may require combination drugs like Flagyl that have been shown to kill the cyst form or bust them open, and so forth. But what we have to know is this is all experimental. The doctors who have good experience now in treating Lyme disease with antibiotics, they're experimenting too. I mean, it's all experimental. We don't have a wonderful guide that tells us here's how you treat Lyme disease. Every patient's different. The strains of the organism are different. Some people have co-infections with Babesia and other things that have to be treated with different antibiotics. So it's a hard situation for people. But I'm very concerned about someone who may have a chronic infection deciding not to be treated, or what I mean? I'm concerned about that. But, you see there are different people on the panel that have different perspectives.
Sure.
And, but we all respect, I think one thing we all agree on is the comprehensive nature. We have to treat the whole patient and take a very holistic approach and use everything in our arsenal, to try to kill these things and get this patient well.
A couple of things that I wanted to mention. One is there is a book called When Antibiotics Fail that addresses the frequency machines that he's talking about. You can find that book on Amazon. You can order it. I think it's about $30 or so. And that would be something you might want to read. Something else to think about, like Dr. Clark said, is about maybe the presence of co-infections or the fact that the spirochete may have mutated into a different form. Another thing to look at, and this is definitely something that you need to have your mother or stepmother talk with her physician about. It's not something I would say to do without a physician's oversight, but to ask about some of the natural herbal supplements. Oregano oil, for us and for other folks that we know, has had a synergistic effect. It made the antibiotics work better for our child. Some other things that we've done have been massage therapy. And we've done massage therapy, and we actually did this as a blind study. We didn't know when they were using just regular baby oil and when they were using the oregano oil on my son. And when they used the oregano oil, he would have really strong Herxheimer's after massaging with oregano oil. So that's something that you need to have your stepmom talk about with a physician. It really, anything that you do with Lyme disease, you just don't want to go out and fly by the seat of your pants. You really want somebody directing you, supporting you, giving you information, kind of things for that. The other thing that you might want to consider is having her talk to them about doing IV antibiotics instead of oral antibiotics, because the absorption rate is a little bit better and therefore the efficacy can be increased.
Okay. Yeah, I think too when she was working on getting diagnosed, she was actually diagnosed with syphilis. And she's like, no, that can't be right. But it was interesting to see that how it has a commonality, in the documentary there. So it was kind of interesting to see that. And I guess she used Igenics she sent out a blood sample, and that's how she confirmed she had it. Because she's been through, I think, probably like 10 doctors now, you know, on and off. So, but I'd like to thank you guys for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
The thing that I noticed, I just want to mention, if you read Cure Unknown, that I found remarkable was that her entire family was infected with Lyme, but there was no magic bullet for any one of the family members. They all responded differently to different therapies. So that's why I think that it's a combination of your own immune system, whether it's triggered an autoimmune disorder within your body that needs to be addressed too, and whether you do have co-infections or just the Lyme. And I also wanted to add that I found a gluten-free diet, which a lot of the Lyme physicians are using now, does really help.
Oh,
So.
okay.
And to make sure also that she's not taking any kind of a steroid, because that can suppress your immune system and it will make it more difficult. The book that Liz mentioned is also available on Amazon. It's by Pam Weintraub.
Okay. Yeah, I think I wrote that down. So, thank you.
Hi, my name's Lindsay. I'm here from Tallahassee, and I'm really new to Lyme disease and advocacy work, but it's affected my life, and I want to fight it. And there's a few concerns that I have that seem to be overwhelming for me, and that is the cost, the physical, financial, and emotional cost of Lyme disease, of mistreatment, of misdiagnosis, and it's something that I'm really having a hard time wrapping my mind around, and a hard time trying to find focus on how to, you know, approach affecting change. And I'm kind of even, you know, turning into maybe it's what we need is a participatory health care system where there's meetings like this and education is transferred, and, you know, anyway, I guess what my question is, and I don't really know who to direct it to, maybe Ms. Higgins or Mandy or anyone up there, but really what are some tools that someone like me who, you know, I have a good touch to my community, and we've been able to do like a benefit, but we want to do more, and we want to get, you know, education in Tallahassee about Lyme disease, you know, and the more I've gone through kind of like outreaching to people, the more people have come forward to me with like their mothers, their bosses, their sisters, their cousins, that they've been bitten in Tallahassee, and I don't know really what would be the most effective way of going about kind of outreach and education, and even financial assistance to the patients that undergo, you know, the process of being misdiagnosed and paying for a wrong treatment, and then, you know, the complications of having to travel to find like proper doctors or, you know, just sufficient treatment. It's a very overwhelming and scary process because there's a lot of different blockades all around this fight, and advice to navigate would be awesome.
Is it Lindsay?
Lindsay.
Lindsay. There is the Langford?
I'm in touch with her.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that organization's in Tallahassee,
Mhm.
and if you call us on our website, there's a practitioner over there, a physician, maybe, I don't want to mention the name now, but you can contact us and I can give you the name of that physician in Tallahassee.
Mm-hmm.
So I can do that for you.
We're working, like, we've actually made some really positive strides on getting my friend treated for Lyme, and as a co-infection as well, a few other things. And so the ball is rolling on that.
Good.
But I kind of want to take on some work as far as, you know, forming a support group. Sandy and I have talked about this, doing more benefits, having a screening like this event, having it in Tallahassee, getting funding for, you know, different kind of, you know, activities that would enhance education on Lyme disease in an area that it seems to be very prevalent. You know, outdoors in Tallahassee is something that's, you know, it's a normal activity. I have friends hiking through the woods all the time and biking through places, and, you know, it's a concern, and I really want to bring the community together, and, you know, but also it really, it's one thing that I wanted my question, a question of mine to be answered, is the, like, as far as like Lyme disease foundations that help support people pay for their health care, or help like a community build a foundation to help like other people who are sick. Like I don't know.
Well, I think Sandy's going to be a great contact, because that's what she does, and if you can, follow in her footsteps, you'll get a lot done and you'll learn a lot. So
Thank you.
I appreciate all the effort you can put into that, because people suffer and people's lives are changed, and it puts tremendous pressure on marriages and finances. So everything you can do to help would be greatly appreciated.
And welcome to the world of Lyme. This has been the fight for 30-plus years.
Thank you.
So everybody's always working against those very same challenges for the last 30-plus years. Working together is a start. Lyme's coming together. And
I was curious. I wanted to ask you a question directly, actually, Mandy, because it seemed like you got diagnosed, but it just seemed that you went through pretty rigorous treatment, and I don't know, like what kind of blockades you kind of ran into. I mean, I watched the film, and I've also read your story on my own time, but what kind of feelings, emotions, like, were running through? I know it might be like obvious, like frustration and stuff like that, but that's kind of, I'm also really interested in like kind of tapping into.
I was a very angry individual because it had gotten so far and it had gone so long. 3 months after my marriage in 2005, June 2005, September of 2005, I almost died. And it was really, really bad. And I won't bore you with that, but I basically looked like an end-stage AIDS patient. And nobody wanted to come in my room or film or be around me because they just thought that was it. They'd be out in the hallway crying. And so I was angry. I was very angry. And then the doctors, when they would address me, if they would address me and not my caregivers, instead of me, it, was very belittling. And like, Lyme doesn't do this, and Lyme doesn't, I was in a hospital in Florida, and this doctor's like, Lyme doesn't even exist here. And in my slurred speech, I just retorted, is everybody from Florida who's in Florida? No. So, you know what I mean? Let's just get past that. So, I mean, as far as that's concerned, educating them, you have to be persistent and you have to be patient, and it takes a lot. And if you just keep knocking on the same doors, and you're friendly, and you're nice, and you just, when they're not, you need to just simply redirect them and say, if I can be courteous, so can you. And, it's, if I can be patient, and I went through all of this, and all I'm asking for is your time, then I think that you at least owe me that.
Yeah.
It's, if you can get together, and going to schools is a huge thing. Educating students at colleges, high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, PTA meetings, going out meeting with horticulturists. Any guys that you see doing construction or road work, they're a target audience. Summer camps. I mean, that's coming up, May's Lyme Awareness Month. There's a ton of things that you can do. And if you just get your friends together, and you even just, make your own trifold board, and go to, they have Healthy Kids Day at the YMCA. They have health fairs at all of the public schools. And at, universities, they'll get together and, and have a fair, if you do a bake sale, so.
Thank you for
wide open.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
I want to address, too, what you were doing, trying to start a support group, because our support group in Southeast Tennessee, we're still neophytes. We're still wet behind the ears with our support group. But the way that we started it was just by word of mouth. We found a local church that would allow us to meet, and the area where we live has, on Wednesdays in the newspaper, they have like a community events thing. And, the AA meetings, the Weight Watchers meetings, the PTA meetings, all those are in there. So we made sure that we got ourselves into that. and really have not publicized a great deal, simply because we needed to make sure that we could chew whatever we bit off. We both have sick children to care for. But we've done some things like that and have approached churches to show the film. That's been a good thing for us. We compiled a notebook of resources and information, and Michelle Brown, right over there, is our co-facilitator, and we both have a copy of the notebook. And then we worked with a local copy store that would allow us to keep a third copy there, so that if people called us on the phone, first of all, our phone number and contact information is in there, so people kind of gravitated their way to it anyway. But this gentleman keeps it in a public location, and he keeps it not in a cabinet, it's in plain view. So anybody who wants to pull it down and go through it can. And then they can make copies of whatever information is in there. And then if they wanted to contact us, we tell them when we meet, where we meet, what we do. We, at this time, are kind of focusing our efforts on education and awareness. And I love your idea about financial support for families. Our dream is huge. I mean, we decided a long time ago, if we're going to dream big. And so we have dreams of actually having this area in Tennessee become a treatment mecca with researchers and physicians and physical therapists and things like that in there. But there are, there are a couple of physical therapists in town, and we tell people, go there. And, you know, if they're going to do a test for Mygenics, we recommend that they get a massage 24 hours before to try to get the Borrelia into the bloodstream. Just little things like that, keeping pamphlets on you wherever you go. Like Mandy said, if you're driving down the road and you're at a red light and these guys are working construction, it doesn't take 30 seconds to roll your window down and stick your hand out and say, here, you might want to read this, and leave it with them. It's just amazing. And one of the things that we most recently did was put together a list. It's just a typed up list on the computer that we can email to people or print and hand out at our meetings. And it has things like the websites for Epidemics. It has the web address for Under Our Skin. It has the web address for the Lyme Disease Association. For just all of these places that they can go and pull this information down on their own. And then they'll come back and they'll ask us other things. You have a godsend. You have a godsend. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. We're still chiseling stone. Okay? But you have this guy here who can send you, talk to this person and copy what she did, talk to this person, talk to that person. So you've got, I mean, you're going to be up and flying before we even get the plane built in Tennessee. I tell you, you really are. You've got so much going for you already that you don't have to reinvent all of it, where we're building from the ground up and you can build on other experiences. So take advantage of it. Before you leave this auditorium tonight, you need to wrestle this man to the ground and you need to get his business card. And you need to know how to contact him by email and by telephone, so that no matter when there's a question, you can pick up the phone or shoot him an email and let them contact back to you or copy it to the person that needs to know it. But take advantage of every resource that you have to build your group.
Michael Leary. I'm a 62-year-old native and lifetime resident of Amelia Island, Nassau County. And I want to commend the panel and those others responsible for the wonderful film and the presentation tonight, and you had a great showing. I would have more faith and more optimism were the auditorium filled up with physicians and medical people, because there lies the problem, as we know. I'm entering my third decade of the Lyme infection experience, and I'm doing a lot better now. Was infected in 1988, probably on Cumberland Island, Georgia, where I visited almost daily and was being bitten by literally thousands of ticks. So I was sort of super exposed. I went through the typical experience that's shared on the film and elsewhere about diagnosis, despite the fact that I'm sitting in front of doctors telling them I have Lyme disease. Spent $50,000 out of my pocket and lots of insurance until that ran out. I had my experience may be somewhat a little different than most patients in that about the time I was infected, I was completing a project where I was compiling population and density data on white-tailed deer, which I was going to compile into a 48 contiguous state map that delineates this distribution and density of whitetails. And The intention was to sell it to hunters, and that worked out okay. But it turns out through various media contacts and what have you, a lot of people contacted me. Harvard, Yale, Dr. Oliver, Georgia Southern, Department of Defense, Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and they wanted to know where deer were because they were associated with Lyme disease. Typically made a deal with these people that I'll share with you what I have if you share with me what you have. The film tonight indicated to me that despite some now 2 decades past, that not a lot different, not much has changed. Not in diagnosis and not a whole lot even in the information that I knew back then. I worked with Dr. Oliver. Actually, I led his research team on Amelia Island trying to find fertile areas to trap rodents, which we successfully did. He subsequently cultured the spirochete out of these rodents. And probably some of you on the panel know this, that this story back then that we didn't have the deer tick down here, so we couldn't have Lyme disease, despite the fact that I know a number of people that were infected, some that have actually subsequently died. Dr. Oliver proved that the tick we'd had down here, Oxydes scapularis, was the same species as the northern tick, was Oxydes damani. Interesting thing is that scapularis was scientifically named first, and we did away with the tick they had up north. They had our tick. Dr. Clark, you indicated you would speak to physicians and doctors and medical practitioners about this. I respectfully would challenge you to contact the VA in Gainesville and talk to their infectious disease specialist. I'm suspect that maybe I have one of these other pathogens that ticks carry, and I might be okay with Lyme disease because I have repetitive symptoms. And I visited with the infectious disease specialist recently, a matter of weeks ago, and though we had a cordial conversation, I almost got thrown out. The lady there, the head of that department, functioned at the same level of people I ran into 20 years ago. And when I mentioned these co-infections, of which I seem to be symptomatic according to the list they put out, she said, there's no way you have any of these things. The VA is my medical service now because I had a chronic disease. I can't get insurance. And so I'm in a dilemma. So my question to you is, what do I do? And I want to find out about these co-infections.
Well, here's our problem in terms of scientific literature, because I think one of the main problems that is preventing us from making progress, and we talk about this amongst ourselves all the time, is that, you know, we greatly sympathize with individual patients' stories. We've heard more than anybody. That doesn't seem to be compelling the medical and scientific community. What I believe is going to turn the tide in all of this is published scientific evidence in the peer-reviewed journals, but not even just from animals and ticks like Dr. Oliver has done, which is tremendous work, because his work and my work is very complementary. We've got to show evidence in the human patients, and we need to show evidence of Lyme borrelia, we need to show evidence of babesia and these other things. Part of the problem for why we don't have more evidence of that type is because people like me can't get funding from the traditional sources. National Institutes of Health will not fund people in the southern United States to do that type of work. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention will not fund a cooperative Lyme disease study in the southern United States. Jim Oliver has been about the only person who's had any success getting NIH funding to do Lyme borrelia research, and I have applied for money from CDC and NIH several times over the years, and they would not fund us. And that's suppressing us, you know, getting more evidence. But it's going to take scientific evidence in good peer-reviewed literature, but it's going to have to be evidence in the human patients. You know, because there's always an excuse. Okay, well, you found it in the ticks, but that doesn't mean they're biting people, and the people are getting it. You found it in the animals, so it's in nature. And so that's why I've been focusing for 2 years on testing human patients. I've only begun to scratch the surface looking for Babesia, but I've been testing people for Babesia also, and about 20% of the people I've tested for Babesia we're getting positives for. Almost 50% of the human patients we're testing are testing positive for Lyme borrelia. And this is good data. It's good DNA sequence confirmed PCR results, but they're not published yet. You know, I'm one person working all alone in a lab all by myself with virtually no funding and with no staff support or anything. And so that slows things down a lot when that's the progress we're making. But that's the only thing I know of that's going to really change things.
There seems to be a good body of evidence for these co-infections, but what do we do as patients to be tested, and where do we go?
I always ask people to consider being tested by me, at least for Lyme disease. And I will tell you that people who often think they were treated successfully for Lyme disease, and they say things like maybe my ongoing symptoms are due to one of these co-infections. I think that's a possibility. I think that's a very, very good observation. But I've noticed that with many of those people as well, they still have Lyme disease. And I can get evidence for that. Now, the problem with the testing I'm doing right now is this is research testing, and I don't think it's valid to be used to use, like to try to get an insurance company to cover you, or it's very sketchy in terms of a doctor using it to make a diagnosis. But it helps them. It helps confirm some of their clinical suspicions. And because Lyme disease is a clinical diagnosis, and the CDC says that very clearly, if that helps them make a clinical diagnosis, then I'm so glad to help. And at the same time, I'm getting data and samples to help me refine my testing and so on. All I can say is take the evidence to them that is in the published literature, and you're familiar with a lot of Jim Oliver's papers and so forth. And if a physician is open-minded to reading that literature, then great. And I would say if they're not, then go somewhere else. And do not quit going to other people until you find somebody that will help you and so on. Now, I know you're kind of locked in. You're in a system here. If you give me a name of somebody to talk to, I'll contact them. If you would ask them to contact me, I'll absolutely respond to them. I'll do all I can do personally.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I have one other concern I'd like to share with you, and this is just one example. There have been too many people infected off of Cumberland Island. You have a high density of mammals and a really thick infestation of ticks. I mean, you go over and you get an allotment of 500 or 1,000 or more if you just walk through the bushes anywhere.
I've been there, and I also have positive results from ticks on Cumberland Island.
And probably some of the other islands that have a high density of warm-blooded mammals. The Department of Defense Aberdeen Proving Ground sent me this poster which says warning Lyme disease area and a bunch of other information they post on military reservations. I went to the management superintendent at the Park Service, this was a number of years ago, 10 or 12 years ago, and shared this with them, and they wouldn't have any part of it. They wouldn't put it up. Typically what happens there, you have people who visit from all over the world, literally. Mm-hmm. They're very excited about seeing wild horses and all the other things that they, in advance of reaching there, have heard about. If they visit just for the day, they get no orientation. They have a large bulletin board there that this could be up on, or a number of other posters. They refuse to put it up there. If you camp, you get an orientation. I've been through this orientation and heard them. They will tell you, we have Lyme disease here. These people are infected and go back to all parts of the world and this country in areas where there are doctors that are not familiar with Lyme disease. These people are in a nightmare circumstance. Bad enough to be here in Florida or elsewhere. I mean, why? I mean, this befuddled me. Well, but I know you people also know about the Plum Island experience.
Well, we were just in Amelia. And that's where Lori was talking about how but we were just there.
Cumberland?
Yeah. We just took the boat tour right by, because we had a Lyme event there, and a showing, a screening.
Did you go on the cruise boats out of Amelia with Lori?
Yes.
She's a friend of mine.
Yes. So, you know, the reason they won't put it up is money. That's why they won't recognize the disease. That's why it's not in all states.
I volunteered to copy these for them. They just wouldn't put them up.
Yes. Well, that's why Disney does not have ticks. It's a bad economy. It doesn't work right now.
I did see one in Guana. There's a sign in Guana State Park now that says beware of ticks. So maybe that's a start. It wasn't there a few years ago. Maybe David Chenoy had something to do with that. Maybe he was able to get that sign up. But that would be wonderful if we could have more notice, because people do go home and get infected and they never know what's going on, and then they end up getting chronic Lyme, and we know how that is.
But it's like Mandy said, it is a tourism.
It's money. Oh yeah,
especially
I know.
In Tennessee. Tennessee is a big tourism state, just like Florida. And that hits the bottom line economy. They don't want that. I mean, Tennessee is never going to step forward and say, come hike in our mountains, come raft on our rivers, come and get Lyme disease. It just doesn't work as a tourism ad. And so they're not going to acknowledge it, even though we know that there are endemic pockets there. And we have seen some proof also for Tennessee even that shows migratory bird patterns that bring it in. We've been doing some research, Michelle and I have been doing some research into deer migration. We know it's there. We know how it's coming. But the states are not going to acknowledge it because it impacts their bottom dollar, and they just can't afford to do that.
Because they saw what happened to Connecticut when they said, yes, we have Lyme here, 30 years ago. And everybody knows, if I go to Connecticut, I've got to do a tick check.
I want to address really quickly, too. We keep going over this, that things have not changed. People have had Lyme for 10 and 20 years and 30 years, and that it seems to be, we have the same atmosphere. The doctors are not recognizing it, that the same stories are being told all these years later, and what can we do? The reason I feel, because I got Lyme 20 years ago here in the Southeast. At that time, Georgia was fourth in the nation with highest number of cases. We had 715 CDC reported cases. It's still on the website. And yet still, this is not being recognized here. And I feel one of the problems is that we are not, as a community and as patients, speaking to others about this. Instead, we're speaking to each other and complaining to each other and saying, yes, I got that too. And instead of going out and advocating and proving to physicians and scientists, and also at the risk of sounding like a rabble-rouser, the fact that Dr. Clark cannot get funding is absolutely ridiculous. That we've known that this disease has been here, at least in animals and in ticks, and evidence of it being in humans. The CDC, the National Institutes of Health, and all of these places are taxpayer-funded entities, and we should all, as patients and as advocates, ask them to investigate this. I mean, it's not acceptable that people are coming forward sick and that more and more of us find out that we have it. So instead of, a lot of times I'll notice, we have a Georgia Lyme Facebook page, and I notice that a lot of people, Lyme patients, will talk between themselves. Oh, I feel awful, I feel... And I always think to myself, man, if you just take that 5 minutes and write your senator, write your politician, call the CDC, call your state health department, and demand that they do something. If they say, I don't have the money, tell them to get the money. Have them come out and investigate the cases. We have found 100 cases within a 25-mile radius of my house right now in Georgia. And the cases are simply not being counted. To imagine that, you know, a disease is up north in this pocket, and then they're finding it in Mexico, and in Colombia, and Peru. To imagine that it skipped from up here and jumps over all the other states and ends up in South America is absolutely ridiculous. And to also imagine that these tests that are supposed to be so sensitive and positive, are so good, produce good results up north, and then produce false positives down south is ridiculous. So until we as advocates and patients step up and start educating other people about it instead of just talking to each other about it, then I think things are going to remain the same. We've got to act. Even if we're sick, we've got to act.
Thank you for the information and the awareness you're bringing to us today. What I wanted to know, when successfully treated and if the bacteria is eradicated, does the body build up any resistance or any immunity against it? Along that line, the film indicated some
research being done on vaccine or immunization. Is there any progress on that? And is Lyme disease the polio of this generation?
I want to start with that one for you. We have a couple of support group members who came to us who had moved down to our Tennessee area from New York. And they were avid hikers and had not been symptomatic until they received the vaccine. And they were actually looking for a physician who would sign off and state that they became ill as a result of the vaccine. And what I was told, I have not confirmed this, and I do want to make that clear, I have not looked for the information confirming it. You may know about it. I don't. But I was told that there was a class action suit against the manufacturer of that vaccine for causing the disease. Okay, GlaxoSmithKline for causing the Lyme. So the vaccine is definitely something to stay away from. And
Well, the current
ironically,
vaccine.
we have some friends who recently moved to Maryland, and they were told they should vaccinate their dog for it. And they called me, and I was like, don't touch it. Yeah. No, they moved in November. Yeah.
Every state says that you should vaccinate your dog with Lyme vaccine.
And if it worked, it might be good. In Georgia and in Florida, we both have one single laboratory, a veterinary laboratory, that's found 500 cases of canine Lyme disease, over 500 in Florida, and over 500 in Georgia. And I always ask the CDC and the state health department people, are our dogs sneaking up to Connecticut while we're sleeping? Because if we don't have it here, something's going on.
And evidently there's new vaccines in the mix, in the works, for Lyme. The problem is there's so many different strains, of Borrelia. How do you know what you're getting vaccinated against? And how would you know if you're resistant when there aren't accurate tests for the disease to detect it in your body? And there's so many different strains, and each little tick, there's a nice little cocktail. How do you know which drink you got?
Now, one of the things, too, that our physician has told us is that if our son, when he becomes well, and I say when because we believe that he will, we're speaking on faith, that when he becomes well, if he were to have a catastrophic event, the loss of a family member, a geographic move, an automobile accident, a serious illness of some other sort, that it can suppress his immune system to the point that that disease can resurge. Now, I've also heard other physicians that say once it's gone forever. So I think that there is some kind of a dichotomy there. I kind of tend to fall, for my personal opinion, on the fact that I think it can come back. And I say that because I've seen him have ups and downs even within his treatment. But again, like Dr. Clark says, there is such a dearth of research on there, and everybody who researches seems to put out, and I'm not knocking you when I say this, but they all seem to put out their own opinions, and they're so diverse that there really doesn't seem to be a great consensus on a lot of things. It's still a very polarizing illness, and either you believe it exists and you treat it aggressively, or you deny the existence and you turn a blind eye. And there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of middle ground that I have found with that. And someone else may have a different experience, but that's been mine.
I think I still have an active infection. I think that my body just has it under control. And I think that as I age, it'll resurface, or if there's a stressful event, it'll resurface. And I'm working on my own method of keeping that in check. But, to each his own. I mean, it's kind of survival of the fittest right now.
I can say I tested a patient who had been diagnosed with Lyme disease. I think she had gone through some treatment 5 years ago. And when I tested her the first time, she tested negative. I tested her a couple of times, actually, her sample. And I was using a slightly different version of my test at the time, and we got negative results. A couple of years ago, after working on this test a lot more, I began to test some more patients, and we started getting positive results at that point with this newest version of my test. I think we just tweaked it and got some better sensitivity. So I went back to the freezer and started testing samples that I had had stored for a long time, and that one person's sample tested positive when we went back and used the newer version of the test. We were able to get a sample from that same patient. It was almost 5 years to the day from the first sample that we got from her, and when we retested the sample, tested the new sample, she tested positive still. That's not the only example that I have of samples like that, but that was the most obvious one that compels me to believe that there is no doubt about chronic infection. And I've also since then tested some other patient samples from people who have been treated very aggressively, some of them for a few years, and they go off antibiotics and they start experiencing symptoms again, and we have been able to get positive results. And this is a DNA test, so we're finding the DNA of the organism in their body, which most likely means they still are infected. That is extremely disturbing to me, because, I mean, I don't want to give anybody, I don't want to say that there's not hope that people get better. I think people can get better. Can we ever completely eradicate this organism? I don't know. Do we need to? I don't know. We've got a lot of organisms in our body at any given time, and I don't know that we need to completely eradicate it to be well. If we eradicated every organism in our body, we would not be well. So, you know.
How much can we live with?
Exactly. And how much can we keep under control? Please.
Next.
Mrs. Higgins, I'd like to direct my question to you. I'm a licensed massage therapist, and it was very interesting what you'd said, that massage therapy has helped treatment. Can you elaborate for me, please?
Actually, what I think I'm going to do on that one is I'm going to bounce that one to Michelle, because she has more experience with that. There you go. That's Lindsay. You know, for us, what we've seen is things with my son when he was undergoing this. His massage was done as part of a physical therapy regimen, and what we would notice is the Herxheimers would be more frequent, they would be stronger, and then after he came out of it, he would feel better.
I have to plead ignorance. I don't know what Herxheimer's is.
A Herxheimer is basically a reaction where your body becomes toxic because the bacteria, as they die, they release toxins into your body, much like roadkill. Mm-hmm. You know, bloats and explodes. Similar to that, but inside, the bacteria will do that in your body and release those toxins into the body. And until you detox it, just, you know, through normal things, drinking water, urinating, and pass those out of your system, you can become very ill. So for Matthew, that's my son's name, what we noticed were things like greater Herxheimers, stronger Herxheimers, more intense Herxheimers, and then more frequent Herxheimers also. With the folks who come through our support group, a lot of times they'll come in and they go, man, I really think I'm sick, but my Western blot was negative. And we tell them, have another one done. Wait a couple of weeks, have a massage, a good, deep body massage. And it seems to force the bacteria into the bloodstream. Now, I have no scientific evidence on this, okay? This is more anecdotal than anything else. But it seems like it forces the bacteria out of the tissues and into the bloodstream where it's more easily captured. And it also seems like it maybe forces it out into the bloodstream where it's more easily attacked by the antibiotics. So
I do have some scientific information, because that's what I do, is research all of this stuff. So there is scientific evidence that spirochetes love to plug up the microvasculature especially, but vasculature as well, just
right.
any of the veins.
Right.
So anything that you can do to help circulation, whether it be with massage, exercise, or whatever, is going to get the toxins out so that you will get the herxes. It will get nutrients in so that you will feel better.
Right.
So massage is a huge thing. Anything that you can do to increase your circulation, because these little buggers are like beavers. They like to block everything up, plug everything up so that things just don't go out, because they don't like being in really thin fluids. They're like viscous fluids.
Right.
So the slower the flow of the blood, the
right.
better they like it. So the sicker you are, you probably have a lot less circulation.
Right.
Hands and feet are cold, that sort of thing. So anybody that you have like that can benefit because they got like cold hands and feet, massage is going to help them a lot. But it will probably make them feel bad to start out with. But explain to them this is because toxins are being released. Drink lots of water, you'll feel better.
Right.
So that's
and one
probably,
of the things I wanted to address too, like what she said, to get the blood moving, it is important. But if you are a person with chronic Lyme and you have the fatigue issues, the exercise by itself can make you really sick, and it can put you in the bed for days. So given the choice between having my son walk a mile or having him be massaged, we went for the massage. You know, it was just much easier on his system, and it would hit everything, because a lot of times with the patients, you can actually feel like knots and nodules in the muscles and under the skin and things like that. And as a massage therapist, you have the great ability to work those out for them and kind of diffuse some of that.
Adhesions.
Distress it some, kind of. And that was really, really important for Matthew when he was in physical therapy, and it has just been an amazing thing. And I'll tell you, too, if you are a licensed massage therapist, you can build a niche around that. There's a fella in Chattanooga whose name I do not know, but she does, who has a cadre of patients that come to him just because they have Lyme, and he understands it and can help them.
I wanted to jump in and just say that the detoxing is very important. Massage, yoga, moderate exercise, nothing extreme, but detoxing, foot baths, saunas. Part of the problem is you're just loaded with toxic waste. You know, as a limey, you're loaded with toxic waste. You've got to get that out, and these are some of the ways to do it. You know, and if you're killing the bug and you're not getting rid of the dead bugs that are in there, you just get worse and worse. So some physicians have told me it's better to detox for a month or so before you even start a protocol of antibiotics. You know, try to get everything working, detox. And I had to do yoga every morning for like 15 or 20 minutes, but then I could function the whole day. And if I didn't, I'm in bed. So just that little 15 minutes got everything moving, as everyone's kind of agreed upon. So what you do is wonderful, so thank you.
Thank you.
Talk to your patients, too, and see if they would be interested in having you use the oregano oil on them. But make sure that you have their consent and that they've talked with their doctor before you pursue that. But it did have, like I said, a synergistic effect. It made his antibiotics work so much better. And even when he was not taking an antibiotics, maybe because he was already herxing, having that oregano oil massage, he would complain sometimes. He'd come home and he'd say, like, I smell like a pizza. And it's like, well, you know, yeah, you do. But look how much better you felt the next day.
At least he's detoxed.
And the importance of drinking water after you do a deep tissue is always conveyed to the patient, but it's especially important with a Lyme disease patient that you make sure that they're drinking like 90 fluid ounces.
Hi, I'm Georgia, and I came down from Miami just to listen to everyone here. Our son was diagnosed with Lyme when he was 18, and he's now 22. He did the 3 month of IV antibiotics together with doxycycline, and then we stopped. This is a year and 3 months exactly later, and that's why we're here, because he's having the same symptoms all over again. So basically my question is to Mr. Boggs, when you did the alternative treatment, were you on the doxycycline together at the same time, or did you do this separately?
Well, at first I was still on the IV, and I started using the machine. So I did a year of oral antibiotics, and the doctor then moved me on to IV because I still wasn't well. And so I used, but the IV didn't work either for me. So I'm not like Mandy, it worked for her. So the best scenario is to not be on any antibiotics because you want the bugs to come out of the cyst form. The antibiotics keep them in the cyst form where they're hibernating. So in my world, it's best for people to be off of them and let the bugs come out because then we can shoot them with the electrical frequency device. So that's how it works.
How long were you on the IV antibiotics?
A year.
A year orally and a year IV?
That's true.
And I was a year IV and 3 years oral after, but you have to also take into account that your son was 18 to 22, correct?
Correct.
That is not a time to be sick, you know, meaning he's not going to want to take his meds, he's not going to want to take his meds and feel bad, and he's not going to want to stay in bed, you know, so basically you're also fighting a really active time in their life that they don't want to surrender. I know, I was there.
Exactly.
You know,
and I was going to ask you that also.
All my friends were out and, you know, living life, starting life, and, you know, I'm sitting there, I try to participate and keep up, and the next thing I know, I'm in bed for 3 days after that, you know? So I totally sympathize with the fact that, you know, he probably doesn't want to do any of that stuff until it gets really bad.
We did IV daily. We didn't
Yeah,
even
IV.
wear a...
Is he
didn't
here?
even wear a peg.
Yes, right there? Yes, because he's looking at me. So, I mean, I would also try to look at raw food if you can, you know, fruits and vegetables. They have healing properties. Living food makes living bodies work. You know, that Green for Life book, it really does help, those shakes, and it can help to minimize the effects of the toxins. That with, you know, other healthy.
How long were you in antibiotics?
4 years.
IV?
IV 1, oral 3. The reason I started with IV because my body had gotten, I used to look like I had cerebral palsy. So the really bad part that you saw, you know, where I'm sitting on the couch, that was me most of the time. And my body had stopped digesting. So if they started orals, I literally would take oral pills and they would come out as pills. My body was not breaking anything down. So I had to do IV. And I knew that if I didn't, I wasn't going to get anywhere. So that was my only option.
Well, I thank you, and Dr. Clark too. I thank him for all his studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgia.
Look also, Georgia, at the book that we mentioned earlier, When Antibiotics Fail, and it will address the machines and how to use them.
Hi, my name's Sandy Stowe. I've been a Lyme patient since 1981. Missouri case, Lyme rash, not diagnosed. Nobody would know what it was back then anyway. I wanted to address the politics of the disease, and it was a nice presentation in the movie in that it broke it down into cartoons that could be well understood by most people. But I think that that's the largest problem that we're having with Lyme disease is the fight to get the other side published and presented. I have been involved in numerous research projects, and one by one I've watched the data get suppressed or not published. One of them was the intramural NIH study. I was a participant in it, and I was actually written up in 2 papers. They categorized me as an atypical MS patient. In my agreement to be in the study, I said that I wanted to have my blood tested at 2 different labs because the contract lab was one in which I always tested negative, and I asked to have another lab done in which I knew I always was positive. So every time I went in for lumbar puncture, spinal tap, and having blood drawn for Lyme testing, each time the tests were absolutely opposite. And none of that information came out from that study. And all that work was done at the NIH, and that was also all funded by federal dollars. Our tax dollars paid for that. None of that came out. The study, we all who were participating in the study thought that the director of the study was essentially on our side. And it became very evident at the end that she wasn't. And so it was very disappointing for those of us that went through the testing. I also, in the course of the jillions of doctors I've been to, had some testing done on blood that was from prior treatment and then post-treatment, years later. And one of the tests was the Schutzer immune complex test. And that got some publication for early active infection in JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association. I think that's where it was published. Anyway, that sort of was poo-pooed, although initially it was well received because it did show immune complexes that were consistent with people with an active infection. I actually went up to Dr. Schuster and said, well, what about the patients who are chronic who have your complexes? I said, I've been treated for over 3 years with IV antibiotics, and I still have those complexes in my spinal fluid. So I think the big trouble is we're still having trouble getting the word out. The conferences are always full of patients and friends of patients. They're not full of doctors. I've been to so many of these conferences. I'm a veterinarian. I've attended many conferences, and it's not the it's just the choir. It's not the congregation that we need to be speaking with, and I don't know how to get the word out there. I've written to the CDC. I got a letter back from David Dennis, who was very condescending and said that they would be happy to test my blood through their facility if I had a doctor's prescription. But I outlined 6 different laboratories that had 6 different Western blot results, and none of that was ever addressed.
You know about the One Health initiative, right? About the DVMs and MDs working together on zoonotic?
No, but
Please write them.
I should. I was very disappointed that they forced Straubinger out of the country.
Well,
From Cornell.
Lyme's not even on their map, unfortunately, for the One Health initiative, and it should be. And with you being a DVM, maybe
Well,
they'll
it's really
listen.
disappointing. Typically, in-house Lyme tests are done on dogs when the heartworm tests are done, and there are a ton of dogs getting diagnosed all the time.
Right.
And veterinarians, on the most part, I only treat cats, so I'm not treating dogs. I don't want to be around ticks. Cats are inside for the most part in my practice. But the dogs that are symptomatic are treated. The ones that aren't treated. But it's been, Straubinger up at Cornell proved that the infection is permanent. And I think that a primate study out of the NIH, I think the results were suppressed on that too. I don't think they ever came out. And many of the scientists that are involved in these studies, they don't get published.
No.
Their publications are not accepted for publication because it's too controversial.
That's
It's
exactly
a
right.
shame. There's a lot of really good animal research out there, and it's a shame.
The thing that I think that is happening is that everybody has good intentions, and we're writing the CDC, we're writing our state health departments, but we're not working together. And one voice is easy to knock down. They can ignore us, they can bat us away like flies, and that's why I think it's very important to work together. And one of the things that I think it's important to do is to you were easily ignored if we say, I'm finding these cases. We have to go to who holds the purse strings and go to our politicians and work with them as a group, not with just one person, and to say, there's an outbreak here. We've got this many cases in this area, and create websites and put people's stories on them in non-endemic areas to prove to people this is happening, and to challenge medical boards that come forward and say, oh no, there's no Lyme in the southeast, and to start holding people's feet to the fire and saying, we demand that this be investigated, because why are we not as worthy as people up north? Come on, this is our taxpayer dollars too.
Right, President Obama, his wife Michelle has a relative with Lyme.
With Lyme disease. I think what could help too is if we all go back to our communities and speak to our friends and clientele or whoever we work with in the business place and talk to them about health issues. I know in my practice it's not uncommon for me to talk to clients about their health, and I talk to people with immune-mediated disease all the time, and I'm convinced that much of it is due to these stealth organisms like Bartonella and also like Borrelia.
One of the things I think is important is prevention, because we all know that it's here. And if the public health officials are not going to address it, then I'm going to. And we started going into the schools with a DVD and going into elementary schools and presenting TikToks for kids. And we addressed the elementary school students in very to make them not fearful. We're very, very careful to say, you could have 100 tick bites and you may not get infected. So we don't want little kids terrified to go outside, but we want to make them aware about proper preventative measures. And by going to the elementary school students, they're going to go home to their mom and go, no, Mom, don't burn that tick off. Because, how many people are getting Lyme because it's improper tick removal. So that's something that we've started doing, is trying to work preventatively. And when we say tick-borne disease instead of Lyme disease, too, that seems to help, because there are other tick-borne diseases, and people should be aware of it. And We don't have enough scientific information about those yet in the Southeast either. And so when we say we're trying to go into the schools and prevent tick-borne diseases, then it's more accepted than if we say, you know, Lyme disease, because there's only 11 cases that have been reported or counted in, I think, Georgia 2 years ago, when, of course, there are many, many more of those.
Another issue, just, sorry, real quick, if when you're going to educate, one thing that's a really big beef for me is that every picture that you see is usually some fair-skinned person. We're missing more than half of our population that way. We're not teaching people who have darker pigment that theirs may be atypical, that what they're looking for may not be what they see on the screen. My best friend from high school and college is a prime example of that. She's African American, and forever, it was her sister actually, forever, they just were going to doctors, and they never even thought about Lyme disease. And it was like they were completely left out. And, you know, so I encourage you to write President Obama. And I encourage everyone to do that. And I encourage, you know, that we really need to look into, you know, better representation for the disease in education.
I think if we talk to adults, though, and groundswell with our peers, I think that as a larger voice, the doctors will have to hear it. So, thanks.
One of the things, too, I was going to mention with the politicians is, you know, to meet with them and ask them to get your state health officials and the CDC officials in the same room at the same time, and to say, you know, we're seeing these cases, they're not being reported, what's going on? How, you know, where is the disconnect here? So I think that's very helpful to have the politicians intercede on our behalf.
Well, I think we're gonna wrap up here. I again want to thank all of you folks for coming, especially those of you who've stayed so long. I want to thank our panel again for being here. I know some of you traveled a long distance, and you know, it's not easy to do this stuff. I mean, you know, we don't get paid to do this. It's beyond what we do every single day in our jobs, but we have a passion for doing this, and we want to help folks. And you know, we're going to continue doing that. This is one step. It's one event, and we'll continue to have more. I hope to someday. I said that about this not too long ago. I said, you know, let's have one of these at UNF, and let's see if we can get a whole bunch of people, and instead of just doing it at a small library. And it's been very satisfying. This was great. I would also like to have a scientific conference someday, and I will probably regret to some extent doing that. But I will also be, you know, thankful for that if we do that. But I think it's a possibility. We obviously have a supportive administration at this institution, and you know, it's as good a place as any to have a scientific conference where we might offer, you know, CEU credits and things like that to try to get the medical community to come in. That's what we have to do to get them here. And we do it a piece at a time, just like we help each patient, a patient at a time, and we keep at it. I mean, I don't think we can give up. Obviously, folks in this community dealing with Lyme disease have a lot of fortitude, and you know, we just keep going. I believe this is all going to change someday. I believe, you know, in the future, it's going to be a very different situation. It can't come soon enough for us in the know, but it will change. And I just love it when people work together and we get folks from, you know, all around the area doing this kind of stuff, and we're going to build on it. So I want to encourage you folks, if you would like to contact any of the panel members, if you'd like to contact me, I'd be happy to share information for you to do that. I've got cards here and everything else. And some of us may hang out a little bit after, you know, we end the session. But you've got to be persistent. You've got to really advocate for yourself as well to get the help that you need. And we'll do what we can to help you. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Appreciate it.